This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. And just a programming note. Next week on Chicago's Morning Answer, Criminal Justice Week. We've got John Pfaff, Fordham University law professor, Carl Hart, who's the chair of the Department of Psychology at Columbia, Eugene Jarecki, the Emmy Award-winning director of the documentary The House I Live In. Have you seen that, Amy?
No, but that's my homework assignment for the weekend.
Correct. And we're efforting David Simon, the writer-producer for The Wire, and others, kind of a wide-ranging discussion, different perspectives on incarceration rates, on the criminalization of nonviolent behavior, particularly drug use we're talking about here, the racial disparities and sentencing, kind of the whole gamut of criminal justice issues, some of the possible solutions, some of the points of disagreement. So it should be a lot of good conversations. The House I Live In, great documentary, about 5 years old. You should check that out.
Can I get an Amazon on demand, Netflix?
Amazon. Certainly Amazon.
Okay.
Maybe Netflix. I'm not sure, but I know Amazon. All right. Yesterday, late afternoon, a deal was reached between Republicans and Democrats, the governor and the speaker, on school funding, K through 12 school funding, and trying to sift through winners and losers here, and ultimately, more importantly, impacts.
Well, the winners are the children, Dan, because it's always about the kids, right?
Yeah. Right.
Uh-huh.
And sometimes people look at this and say, well, Rahm's happy, so Rauner must have lost. Oh, okay. Well, the Illinois Education Association, the Chicago Teachers Union are unhappy about a big victory that Rauner got in the deal. So did he lose? And kind of winning and losing is, I think, sort of missing the point. So here's just the top line for me. All right. Take your calls on this 312-642-5600 turnkey.pro answer line, 64636DA turnkey.pro text line. The top line is this is a huge victory for choice in education for low to middle income families. There was the only structural change that was under discussion that is part of this conversation was the tax credit scholarships that are part of the deal. That's the only change. Does this deal throw bad money after bad money at the Chicago public school system? It does.
Yeah, aren't they going to be able to pay for the teachers' pensions? Just like they do for other districts? No, that's what Channel 7 was touting. They said the state will pay for teacher pensions just like they do for other districts in the state.
Yes. So
that was the win aspect maybe for Mayor Emanuel.
Right. So is it throwing bad money after bad money? The answer is yes. Is it fairly characterized as bailing out Chicago from their own mismanagement and scams, like half of the properties in the city being in TIF districts, artificially deflating the property value and thus the property taxes that are collected to support the Chicago public school system? Is that part of it? Yep, sure is. But here's the rub with that. You Illinois voters, we Illinois voters, have given the governor the political landscape, which he has. We gave Illinois Governor Rauner, and we've also given him essentially supermajority control of the General Assembly for Chicago Democrats. That's the landscape that actually exists, right? And so that's our expression of who we want in public office and who we want making policy. So when you say, Madigan and Cullerton, we want you there forever, and we're going to fill in underlings under you so that you have majority control and can dictate terms on so many issues, well, yeah, you're going to get rolling bailouts of Chicago. You're going to get papering over the excesses of big government Democrats and complicit Republicans. So that's what happened. So there was no, and unfortunately, the Republican Party still searching for an identity in this discussion started from the same premise as the Democrats, evidence-based school funding. So whether it was Rauner's amendatory veto, which redirected the Chicago bailout money through the school funding formula to the rest of the schools in the state, so that, as we talked about in this show, 97% of the schools receive more money under Rauner's amendatory veto than they did under the Democrats' plan. So when that happens, there's going to have to be some horse trading, because they're basically both supporting the system. They're redirecting a portion of the money differently. That's not structural change. That does nothing to change the trajectory of K through 12 education in terms of the quality or the financing of it. Nothing. So was Rauner's AV better than what Chicago Democrats sent him on school funding? Sure it was. And oh, by the way, you know who opposed Rauner's AV despite 97% of the schools getting more money? School superintendents who were going to get more money because they're beholden to the Democrats. Democrats in the Senate whose schools were going to get more money but voted to override the governor's veto. Democrats in the House whose schools were going to get more money but were prepared to vote to override Governor Rauner's amendatory veto. So the people whose constituents and school districts were benefiting under Rauner's amendatory veto were against his amendatory veto. Do you get it? It's politics and it's power, and they have it. And they're getting backed up by your school districts. So for the people who say Tiny Dancer is celebrating, so Rauner must have lost, take a look at your school districts and your school district leadership and your state legislators, because they're voting against your interests, like more resources for your school districts at the expense of Chicago rather than more resources for Chicago at the expense of your school districts. That's the landscape, ladies and gentlemen. And so on that landscape, what's the opportunity you have? What's the one structural change you can make in K through 12 education that's not only has legacy impact for the governor, but more importantly, enfranchises tens of thousands of families, low to middle income families, with the same choices that the rich and the politically connected have? It's the tax credit scholarship. And here's what the tax credit scholarship does as part of this deal. $100 million tax credit scholarship program, 75% tax credit. So it's, $100 million, $75 million in tax credits to voluntary donors. Remember, this is new money into the system. Oh, you're repurposing money away from CPS or away from the schools, as these hack superintendents and racist demagogues like Karen Lewis are claiming. This is stealing money from black and brown children. That's what the teachers' unions are saying. Giving money to families who don't have it to make the schooling choice for their children that they can currently, that's taking money, according to Karen Lewis, in this Orwellian world in which we live.
So where's this money coming from? It's
voluntary donations to essentially sanctioned nonprofit scholarship granting organizations, SGO, scholarship granting organizations, that will then distribute according to the strictures of the statute. So here's the deal. So here are the particulars here, because listen up.
This is big news.
Middle income families, listen up. Families earning up to 300% of the federal poverty rate are eligible, a family of four. That's $80,000 household income annualized. Okay. They can later earn up to 400% of poverty after initially qualifying. So that takes you close to six figures. 80 families with household income of $80,000 or less qualify for these scholarships. All right? Let me continue. The tax credit scholarship will cover up to 100% of private school tuition, up to the maximum of the average Illinois cost to educate, which is roughly $12,300 scholarships. So you're talking about, you want to send your kid to Ignatius or Bennett or, pick a great school.
Francis Parker.
Northridge.
Latin.
Well, if you can make up the difference, you say I can pay $30. If I could get the tuition down to $15,000 to go to Latin, or $18,000 to send my kid to Latin, then you can make up the difference. But I mean, you're talking about great schools with great track records that a family making the median household income in Illinois is like $55,000. There's no way you could afford that, right? But with these scholarships, these middle income families can afford to send their kids to better schools, whether you're in the city or the suburbs. $12,300. That's up to, that's basically $50,000 worth of scholarship at the K through 12 level to send your kid to a better school. English language learners or those with special education qualifications get larger scholarships. They can be as much as double the standard scholarship, so up to 24/6. The program sunsets in 5 years, but in 5 years, you're going to build a constituency of families whose children are receiving these scholarships and charting their course. And what happens when you create a constituency? Yeah, it's going to be very difficult for the Democrats, even as beholden to the teachers union as they are, to unring this bell. Here's what happened in Florida. Let's use real world examples. Florida, under Jeb Bush, when they had control of the governor's mansion and the legislature, and that's a little bit more of a red state, generally speaking, than Illinois, wouldn't you say? They started out at $25 million fund, and this is about 15 years ago. Today, that fund is $600 million.
Wow.
Tens of thousands of families participating, mostly Hispanic and African American in Florida, and benefiting as a result. So the only structural reform that was available is the one that was secured. That's why this is a win. The bailout of Chicago, the lighting hundreds of millions of more dollars on fire in the centrally planned K through 12 systems in this state, that was baked in. You weren't going to change that. Not with the political leadership that the voters of Illinois have given the state. Wasn't going to happen. To accomplish this with that landscape that I'm describing is nothing short of miraculous. And let me tell you, here's a real lesson in politics. It's about aligning interests, not about making friends. You know who deserves much of the credit for this?
Who?
Cardinal Cupich.
Oh.
Cardinal Cupich, who I've regularly excoriated on this show for his forays into labor economics and climate science and all kinds of things. Toleration, if not admiration, for race hustlers like Father Flagler. But on this, his leadership was instrumental because you had to get Madigan and Cullerton on board. Maybe Cardinal Sue. I mean, he's not auditioning for the job.
Was it divine intervention?
No, it wasn't. It was hard work.
No, yeah.
And it was smart, strategic work. Cardinal Cupich, the One Chance Illinois folks, it's a nonprofit advocacy group. They put together a broad-based coalition that included trade unions and police and fire, across the political spectrum. Black, white, Latino, the whole thing, because people get it. My kids are relegated to terrible schools in Chicago and elsewhere that haven't educated anybody except accidentally in generations, and that's unfair. Shouldn't be that way. My kids should have access to the extent that they can achieve, but have access from kindergarten to as good a schools as Rahm's kids do, as Dan Proft got to go to, as anybody else. Exactly. So you want to talk about all that? You want to spend your time talking about all this race baiting nonsense that we've had to obsess about for the last 2 weeks? Or do you want to talk about actual substantive improvements in the lives of children and families? It's mainly based on socioeconomic status, but of course it's disproportionately Latino and African American when we're talking about big urban centers like Chicago. That's a fact. And here's another fact. What happens when families get choice? Eva Moskowitz, who's the founder and CEO of Success Academy Charter Schools in New York, had a good piece in the Journal this week. Here's what Success Academy has done. Scaling models that work. This, you could say the same thing about Tim King's Urban Prep Academy schools in Chicago. Yeah. But listen to this. The results of 2017 New York State tests were released Tuesday. In Central Harlem, the number of students meeting rigorous Common Core math standards has more than doubled since 2013. Students attending charter schools account for 96% of that growth. Results for English language are similarly inspiring. The highest performing charter schools like Success Academy have actually reversed the achievement gap. Reversed the achievement gap. Black and Hispanic students from Central Harlem's 7 Success Academy schools outperform white students across the city by 33 points in math and 21 points in reading. Low-income students outperformed the city's affluent students by 38 and 24 points in math and reading, respectively. Yeah, that's what happens. It's not about these kids can't achieve. These families won't make the choices, even if given the resources to make the choices. That's a bunch of hogwash. That's a bunch of teachers' union racist bull jive. They're the discriminators. You want to have an honest conversation about race? Let's talk about it. Because most of the advocates for this tax credit scholarship and most of the beneficiaries are disconnected. I mean, there's a tax credit scholarship program in Illinois. There isn't. Doesn't impact me.
Well, your imaginary family.
Well, right. But I mean, my parents sacrificed for me. I got a good education. If this whole place burns down, I'm going to be fine. I'm lucky because I had good parents who sacrificed. I got a good education. Can you say the same about the 85% of black and brown kids in CPS? I don't think you can. Can you say the same about a lot of white kids in middle to lower middle income suburbs? You can't. It's not about race. It's about opportunity. And what tax credit scholarships do is provide opportunity for kids for whom opportunity has been foreclosed by the system, by the central planners, and mostly by the politicians who spend all their time talking about how much they're focused on those children and those families. And the more a politician talks about the focus on those children and those families, the less you know, the more you know, the less they are actually interested in advancing the cause. It's a cover story. It's a misdirection play. That's what you're getting from the unions in the wake of this deal, even as we pour a lot more money into these failing systems like CPS. But this is a real deal. This is a real deal. And tens of thousands of children are going to have a completely different K through 12 education experience and completely different opportunities as a result because of the deal that was cut yesterday. To me, that's a win. It was the only win available, and it's a huge transformational win for the state of Illinois. And that's not something that we get to say very much in the state in the recent past. So as critical as I am of the Republican Party and politicians in general, the Cardinal, as I mentioned, on this one, Cardinal Cupich, Governor Rauner, the negotiating teams, including on the Republican state senators Dan McConkey and Jason Barickman, they deserve a lot of credit. They deserve a lot of credit.
This is the